is the probably final day. They are flying back to Japan tomorrow, which means they need to accomplish some homework, which means making a presentation in front of the key players in Washington, D.C., and Professor Uchida needs to attend it. So he actually apologized for his absence by asking me to say a few words on behalf of USJI. Okay, so this is the end of the my substitute for Professor Uchida. Again, I'm the only university academics here. So just like as I do for my university or other seminars, I just prepare a small slides so that you can probably have a better understanding, just skipping my terrible English. And although I spent some time in Washington, D.C., but I think quite fortunately, I was given a chance to educate myself in Australia. So I speak a bit different English, except for Sam, of course. So I think that everyone is given 15 minutes presentation. So let me use the PowerPoint. So I tried to, to use that. Okay, today's topic, the rebalance, American rebalance rate, and what TPP can do. Oh, here. With any microphone?
There, use the podium microphone.
This one? Oh, okay. And my presentation is, yes, focusing on Japan. And currently, as you know, the US and Japan has been heavily engaged in the so-called market access negotiations. And we heard, now both governments are at the final stage. But of course, there are a few remaining issues. I try to come back on that. But I try to also focus on some of the broader implications which TPP may carry, particularly in terms of the regional economic order building. So I just set up the three-level analysis for Japan, its TPP commitment. Usually global regional structure, and also bilateralism, which means the US-Japan, the role. Of course, two countries in terms of the economic scale simply acting as a predominant player. For example, in total, more than 80% of the GDP actually occupied by the two economies. So that's why the negotiations considered to be quite significant in terms of the concluding the TPP, particularly market access. And domestic politics, this is quite, the sticky, the area, probably for many countries, particularly in my country, Japan, has quite infamous area in terms of the trade negotiations, which is agriculture. And I try to focus on what Prime Minister Abe has tried to do to change the Japanese image as a heavy protectionist of agriculture. And actually, Abe and his government has done quite, in my view, good job, particularly eliminating hurdles, probably biggest hurdles for any Japanese trade negotiator, which is the lobby activities by farm organizations. We call JA, Genchu. JA is Japan Agriculture. And I think in the first time in the political history of Japan, JA, Genchu has been touched on, and Abe and his team was successful in removing some of the political, nasty, influential power which JA had held over the last 5 decades or so. Of course, most significant element of Japanese agricultural reform is to make Japanese agriculture sector internationally competitive, so that we don't need to heavy tariffs. And of course, heavy tariffs is sort of a subject for JA Zenchu, and they have been lobbying quite heavily against the any liberalization, particularly some of the key sectors like rice, sugar, pork and beef, wheat, these kind of stuffs. Japan has never, ever liberalized. But as I tried to say, well, in the TPP bilateral negotiation with the United States, US certainly wanted Japan to move. And also I touched on the Australia-Japan FTA, which became effective actually last month. As you know, Australia is one of the largest, the exporting country on agriculture. And it took actually 7 years to conclude. Particularly it was started by Abe in the first administration. And it was second administration by Abe who tried to finish. And why I'm talking about it? Because that might be relevant to the TPP market negotiations, particularly in terms of the US-Japan engagement in the total TPPs. So let me touch on the big picture first. Mr. Froman, I think he made a presentation here a couple months ago. And I just quoted, TPP, the avenue through which the US, working with nearly a dozen other countries, is playing a leading role in writing the trade routes of role for critical regional influx. And particularly he emphasized this in his words, geoeconomics, together with geopolitics. Usually we don't talk about geopolitics in terms of the trade negotiations in other countries. But of course, TPP considered to be a quite, important tool for dealing with some of the geopolitics issues. But as far as I know, no major leaders try to elaborate on it. So what's that? My next quotation is Shinzo Abe, who made a presentation when he decided coming to Japan to the TPP negotiation just 1.5 years ago. He actually highlighted the interesting universal values of the freedom, democracy, human rights, and the rule of law as a critical foundation for the economic rule-making approach. Why he needed to emphasize that point when making a decision on Japan's participation. Well, of course, behind those, certainly, very important country is working very hard, to try create the regional order in its favor with China. And particularly, there are a number of ways of describing what China wants to do in the regional economic order in Asia Pacific. So one element which I want to pick up is the particularly changing the trading structure between the China and America's key allied nations, which particularly includes Australia, South Korea, and Japan. Both three nations actually heavily relies on the China's trade at the moment. So three nations, the top trading partners are actually China. But 10 years ago, it was the United States. So over just the last decade, the situation was totally changed. And one commentator actually made a interesting statement. Allure of China's economic dynamism makes countries increasingly attentive to Beijing's wishes and sensitivities. It may be true the case with AWIB talk. I know this is not the topic here today. AWIB is Asia Investment Infrastructure Bank, proposed by China. And Korea and Australia were supposed to sign the Minister of Understanding to be the foundation member. But eventually they are not signing it. But anyway, today's topic is TPP. So I think all negotiators, in my views, it's at least leaders of the TPP, 12 countries, have been aware of the China, particularly in terms of the United States and Japan. And again, my talk today is focusing on Japan. That I can definitely say that Mr. Abe has been strongly aware of the China's presence, not only for economic order making, but also the even strategic and security sense, obviously, particularly as we observed his keynote speech for the Shangri-La conference in Singapore last June. So that's why I think US-Japan market access negotiation was very important, particularly to make the TPP first successfully launched. And that would have a quite important impact on the rule making, particularly in terms of the regional economic order. That's why the Abe's commitment, as I described later, to make Japan's economy more robust and competitive, particularly in terms of agriculture. This was quoted as quite lagging behind the international competitiveness. But to be frank, the Japanese and tariffs on veggies and fruits, this is quite low, 0 or a few %. But as I mentioned, some of the products like rice has tremendously enjoying the high tariffs. So that's the issue. So as far as I know, Japan, however, has been preparing for making some agriculture concessions. Actually, Japan did it from Australia first, particularly in terms of the beef. This is the very first case Japan has decided to reduce the tariffs bilaterally, which means exclusively from Australia. And what kind of implication it has for the TPP? Because in terms of the market share of the beef in Japan, Australia actually has bigger ones. And actually, they're nearly two sides, double size of the United States. US beef market, so US beef was quite popular in Japan, but because of BSE, simply Australian beef became predominant. I know the American beef has been catching up, but still, the more than 50% of the beef came from Australia. The point is, now because of bilateral FTA signed between Japan and Australia, such a preferential tariff was given to the Australian beef producers. Actually, this year, 6% dropped from 38.5 to 32.5, which means Australian beef beef producers can enjoy the much lower tariffs than the American ones. If TPP were not successfully launched within 1 year, 2 years, suddenly, the competition between the American and Australian beef in the Japanese market becoming more significant or harsher. Interestingly, the Australian trade minister said, we are not competing against Japanese beef producers. Our competitors are beef producers from other countries, which means the United States. So my question to the American people, is this politically feasible or sustainable? Which means, still American beef producers needs to pay the 38.5% tariffs, while Australian beef producers enjoying much lower tariff rate. So in my view, the market share must be much more favorable to the Australian beef producers if TPP were not launched. I don't know how strong the American beef producers' lobby activities here in the United States. But if they had quite important voices in Washington, certainly they would try to do something, to change the situation. Particularly Japan is one of the largest, of course after China, is the beef market in the world. So again, I just quote, American beef industry say we need to be prepared to be at a disadvantage for several years against the beef in Japan. So TPP concluded, but of course ratification is awaiting. So we need probably for few more years, even if the TPP were concluded this year, to make it effective. So I think the political cost is quite high, in my view, for the United States. Okay, this is sensitive farm products and the US-Japan negotiations. Again, I'm not talking everything here, but a point is, particularly the rice. This is quite interesting. Well, I said, tariff ratio is 778%, but the situation was quite drastically changed. So I need to say it's nearly 280% because of the international rice market. Rice price has been dropping, so becoming higher and higher, and the Japanese rice market prices was dropping. So that currently 341 yen per kilo was actually imposed on any foreign rice in Japan. So situation was what the US wants. Rice is excluded from the Australian-Japan bilateral FTA, but US wants to keep, do something. So I heard probably some quota will be given to the US, which means US can export rice without any tariffs. But the Japanese government currently has purchased and never put these foreign rices in the market, which means we Japanese consumers cannot buy it, which means still rice prices in Japan kept high, intentionally by Japanese government. But this system will be abolished by 2018, which means rice can be more freely exported to Japan. And of course, Japanese rice producers can export freely to other countries. So this is currently going on. So which might have some effect on the Japanese negotiation on rice, particularly against the United States. So let me touch on the domestic politics now in a few minutes. So this is the situation, particularly trend of agricultural workforces. Importantly, average age for Japanese farmers, more than 65 years old. I don't think that they continue to work for the more than 5, 6, maybe 10 years. So we need to bring more young people to the farm sectors. This is the first point. Second, of course, the total number of the farmers has been dropping. So it looks like the agriculture sector not so attractive to young people. So this is something which Abe wants to change. So farm reforms, which Japan has been committed over the last year, is probably helpful for Japan's full engagement in negotiations of the regional integration, not only for TPP, like RCP, East Asian Framework, or CJK, China-Japan, Korea FTAs. Abe's election last December was quite helpful, particularly for gaining more support from public on some of the agricultural reforms. So currently 60%, PPP dropped recently because of some political scandals again. So agriculture minister was just sacked last week. But anyway, former agriculture was just, they come back, so should be no problem for Japan. And again, role of Zenchu as the most powerful pressure group will end in 2019, which means central organization, its peak organization of the Japanese agricultural associations will be normal, so-called the cooperative organization, which means they cannot collect the huge money from their own members. Which means, for example, those 8 billion yen per year, this membership fee has been always used for mobilizing the anti-TPP movement or the anti-movement for against the inclusion of the corporate in the farm sectors. Again, these kind of the activities could not be sustained because of the incapability of collecting the membership fee from local agriculture associations. So that's very significant. I know there are a number of the reform areas, but I have to emphasize only on political element. And finally, Gentan. Well, this is government they intentionally maintain the higher rice prices, particularly asking Japanese farmers not to produce the rice. But this system was ending soon, which means rice farmers, as I mentioned, can freely produce as much as they like. So if they believe their products are competitive internationally, they surely can export. So in this case, TPP is very significant. So interestingly, those farmers are voicing a welcome statement to Japan's participation in TPP. That's very rare. The farmers are supporting the TPP or trade liberalizations. But of course, they are thinking they are very much useful for their own jobs. Again, this is a bit unnecessary one, but what Japan, the 3 variables I highlighted driving Japan's interest in regional integration area, but most importantly, China factor. But anyway, I would be probably happy to talk more on that in the Q&As, and if you like. Anyway, thank you very much for your listening.
Thank you. Much food for thought. Tammy?
Well, thank you. I also want to thank the Wilson Center for this kind invitation. I'm going to talk about the U.S. relationship with Asia because that's where the most dynamic economies reside, and it represents the most opportunity for American companies and also broader economic interests. Even with the growth of China and other regional markets slowing over the past year, there's still more dynamism and opportunity for job-supporting U.S. exports in Asian markets than in any other region in the world. Asia has an exploding middle class. 2 billion citizens have joined the middle class that accounts for more than half of the continent's population, up from just 1/5 in 1990 or 25 years ago. And the expectation that another billion plus people in Asia are expected to join the middle class by 2020. Today's Asia generates 1/3 of global GDP and purchases 1/4 of America's exports. So it's no surprise that U.S. companies continue to place a high priority on Asia as a growth opportunity. However, despite the dramatic growth in Asia, the U.S. share of the region's imports declined about 43% between 2000 and 2010, according to an analysis by the think tank Third Way. In fact, if you take China out, East Asia in 2014 purchased a smaller share of U.S. exports than it did 5 years before, despite the fact that there was a 54% increase of total U.S. merchandise exports during that period. So what that means simply is the Asian pie is growing, but America's slice of it is shrinking. So how do we account for that, frankly, mediocre performance of American exports in the world's most dynamic economies? Well, one reason, I believe, is the expanding web of intra-regional trade agreements. And this is part of a global trend. According to the WTO, there are now 398 bilateral or plurilateral free trade agreements in force around the world. But the U.S. only has 14 free trade agreements with 20 countries. Now, these 14 FTAs do a good job of leveling the playing field with those countries because according to Commerce Department data, nearly half of America's exports go to those 20 FTA countries, and they represent only about 10% of the global GDP. So our slice of their pie is significantly larger. So what that tells me is FTAs work for America. The competitive challenge to U.S. business posed by this expanding network of other nations' trade agreements appears to be most significant in Asia. And as we see, Asian production chains have expanded to meet the booming regional demand. U.S. goods are being left behind. Excuse me. Many U.S. manufacturers and farmers are being displaced by local competitors or firms based in the EU, Australia, Korea, or others in Asia, as they forge their own preferential trade deals in the region. As my colleague Takashi-san just mentioned, the Australia-Japan FTA and how Australian cattle farmers have an advantage over American cattle folks today. So in short, right now, Asian nations are designing new architecture for trade in the world's most dynamic region, and it doesn't include the United States. You know, when I first went to Asia 25 years ago, America was almost every country in Asia's #1 trade partner. Today, I don't believe we're anyone's #1 trade partner. We're often number 3 or 4. China is now the main trade partner for most Asian countries and is exerting influence through various means. They are negotiating a competing but lower standard regional trade architecture, the RCEP, or Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, that's made up of the 10 ASEAN economies, Australia, New Zealand, Korea, Japan, China, and India. So we call RCEP minus the U.S., basically. The Chinese also are initiating the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank, and they are investing heavily in certain economies in Asia. So what does America need to do to strengthen our partnership with Asia and ensure that we're not left out of the Asian century? To me, it's quite simple. The Trans-Pacific Partnership. The TPP is the most concrete and important step that America can take to solidify the rebalance in Asia in both geostrategic and economic terms. A comprehensive, high standard, and ambitious TPP will send a strong message about U.S. commitment to the region. But more importantly, it will embed American companies in real terms in the Asia Pacific at a time when there are competing trade negotiations underway that will determine what the rules of the road for trade in Asia will be. And if the U.S. isn't helping to shape those rules, others will. And if we're not part of the shaping of the rules, they're likely to be discriminatory against American companies. The standards set in this agreement will not only dictate the way trade and investment is done among the initial 12 TPP economies, but it's also going to have a much broader impact. It's going to shape and influence not only regional, but global trade standards for decades to come. from all the reports and statements and conversations that we're aware of and that we have with all of our, with USTR and with our other 11 partners, the TPP negotiations are in the final end game now. We believe within the next few months, the TPP negotiation, which has been underway for almost 5 years, includes 29 chapters of legal text, is about to close. Now, there are still some very hard issues on the table, and most of them are going to require significant political leadership from the 12 countries. As in all negotiations, whether between people or countries, it's always the hardest things that are done last, and that's where we are. The U.S. is asking our TPP partners to do some really difficult things. Some of the rules that we're asking for that will benefit America the most, particularly on high IP standards, competition with state-owned enterprises, digital trade, investment, financial services, and others. Excuse me. If the U.S. insists on continuing to shield our most sensitive industries, and you should think sugar, textiles, apparel, and footwear, from trade liberalization under the TPP, then the standards in the final agreement will likely be lower. And U.S. consumers will not only continue to face a high prices for less choice, but our most innovative industries, our key economic drivers, will be disadvantaged. As my friend Takashi-san said, Japan, when they entered TPP, agreed to put all products on the table, and they have. They have negotiated on all of their agriculture products. Now, it's true, they're not going to zero in their 5 sacred areas: beef and pork, rice, sugar, dairy, and wheat. But guess what? America's not going to zero in everything either. We're not going to zero in sugar, textiles, apparel, and footwear, just to name a few. So every country has some sacred products. But what's happening right now in our parallel negotiation with Japan is we are making significant progress on commercially meaningful access in those significant products. A real barometer for me that we were making real progress was 2.5 weeks ago when a group of 78 agriculture trade associations all signed a collective letter to Congress saying, please support Trade Promotion Authority. They're saying that because they realize we're almost there on TPP, and I think they're almost there in what they need to fully support TPP. Now I'd like to make a couple of quick comments about the transparency of TPP, because there is a lot of misinformation in the media about transparency. Personally, for me, it is very frustrating to hear opponents of TPP complain that the administration is negotiating in secret, but in the next breath, they say it's a bad deal. Well, if it's negotiated in secret, how do you know it's a bad deal? I don't understand. The reality is that the consultation on this agreement has been unprecedented, with the administration significantly raising the bar on consultations and stakeholder engagement. In addition, USTR has already provided the Hill over 1,600 briefings. So I don't buy the there's no transparency argument. I'd like to speak a little bit about Trade Promotion Authority, TPA. New trade agreements like TPP have great potential as a tool to stimulate economic growth and job creation. However, to make these or any other growth-driving FTAs a reality, Congress must first approve Trade Promotion Authority, or Fast Track. With the exception of our U.S.-Jordan free trade agreement, the U.S. has never passed a free trade agreement or a multilateral trade agreement without Trade Promotion Authority. While foreign governments may initiate negotiations with the U.S. without TPA in place, they have historically proven leery of making the difficult political choices associated with the final phases of negotiations when the U.S. doesn't have it. In this sense, TPA will strengthen the hand of our USTR negotiators. It will help them secure the best possible deal for American workers, farmers, and companies. It is the Chamber of Commerce's view that the U.S. cannot afford to stand aside as other governments vigorously pursue new agreements that exclude American business and put our industries and our workers at a competitive disadvantage. If we do not engage forcefully, American farmers, workers, and companies will pay the price. So without TPA, we won't be able to conclude TPP and other agreements that will ensure that our farmers, employees, and companies are able to export and compete in the lucrative foreign markets. For all of these reasons, we believe the renewal of TPA should be a bipartisan imperative. Asian economies, particularly the TPP participants, are watching eagerly the emerging debate here in Washington over the legislation to renew TPA. Early approval this spring will bolster the TPP negotiations and by enhancing the leverage of the U.S. Officials at the negotiating table to conclude the strongest possible agreement and giving our TPP partners the confidence that now is the time to make their last, final, and best offers. The last point I want to leave with you is if the U.S. isn't actively helping to shape the fair, predictable, non-discriminatory rules in Asia, others will. And American companies and workers will be left on the sidelines in the world's most dynamic, economically vibrant region in the world. We must do TPA and we must conclude TPP. Thank you.
Before I ask Simon, just to clarify, because I know it's going to be raised by someone here, your best guess on the TPA?
I think that a bill could possibly fall as early as next week. And I think that Congress, and it will be a bipartisan vote, I believe that we will have it very soon. And TPP, I think once that we have TPA, then the final offers come together for TPP. I'm betting before June. Anybody want to bet?
You heard it here, right? We're
and
on the record.
I should ask my Japanese friends because the U.S.-Japan piece is critical. But we are making real progress. Wendy Cutler, our chief negotiator for the Parallel, has been negotiating with the Japanese for 25 years, and she continues to say that it's shocking to her how forward-leaning Japan is. Prime Minister Abe this is a new Japan. We're not quite there yet, but they're doing things that for seasoned Japanese, hands, we couldn't imagine. So we're getting there.
All right, thank you. Simon.
Sure. Well, let me join others by saying thank you very much to the Wilson Centre and to the US-Japan Research Institute. It's a real pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to be part of such a strong panel, and the two presentations I've heard already have been fantastic. I was really chuffed that you described me as charming and renowned. Often at home, my kids ask me, "What's your job involved, Dad?" And I kind of explain it to them, and I can just see their eyes glazing over, and they think I just do the most boring job in the world. So tonight I'm going to tell them that I am charming and renowned. So what I wanted to do today was cover four main topics. One is to give you a sense of the domestic economic context in Australia and how that influences out the way we look at Asia and the TPP in the region. Secondly, to talk to you about the strategic interests of the TPP for Australia. Third, to talk to you about the economic implications of the TPP for us. And finally, to give you an Australian sense of progress, to sort of add, I guess, to what other speakers have outlined today. So to start with, where's Australia at? What's the context at home? So we very much think of ourselves as an open trading nation. About 42% of our GDP comes through trade, and that's a fairly substantial increase on those sorts of percentages back in 1990. We have a government in Australia that's about 18 months old, and it has taken a very clear approach to wanting to make sure Australia is seen as open for business. So that's things like regulatory reform, expedited approval processes for major projects, cutting red tape and attracting investment, and very neatly fitting within that exact agenda is clinching trade deals in the region. So quite remarkably in some respects, during that 18-month period, we've concluded trade agreements with 3 major trading partners in the region. In this order, it was South Korea, Japan and China. And that complements, frankly, an existing suite of agreements we already have in the Asian region. So Singapore, Thailand, Malaysia, and we have a deal with ASEAN. The government is also very aggressively pursuing finalisation of our negotiations with India and has said on the record they'd like to conclude those negotiations this year. We also have ongoing negotiations with Indonesia and, of course, as others have pointed out, regional comprehensive economic partnerships. 17 of the 19 East Asian Summit members are part of that. So then to the TPP. I think I would, in an Australian context, I could say very clearly we are strongly committed to those negotiations, and we've been an extremely active participant. If you ask whether it's the negotiators or other parts of other members of the TPP, it's quite clear Australia is very keen to finalise these negotiations. My Australian Trade Minister was out just in a couple of media articles in the last sort of 2 weeks talking about how quickly he thinks this deal can come together and how much interest there is, or how much offensive gains there are to be for Australia in the TPP. And I can tell you, sitting here in our embassy in Washington, I see a lot of high-level visits coming through Washington, and it's very clear just how important the TPP is in a bilateral context with the US. So the second area is the strategic implications for Australia of the TPP. The first thing I'd say here is, and others have already pointed to, that just the sheer importance of the TPP for the region and for the US. People will talk about different statistics. The one I like to sort of draw on is the middle class consumer growth, which our statistics suggest was around 525 million middle class consumers in 2009, growing to about 3.2 billion by 2030. I mean, that's an explosive level of growth. You can't ignore needing to be involved in that region. Point 2, the TPP is the platform for sustained US economic engagement in the region. It's the economic core of the US rebalance. Australia very much sees itself as a partner to the US in that initiative. And I can only speak for Australia, but I imagine this applies to other TPP members. Sustained US presence in Asia is welcomed, certainly by Australia, I'm sure by others. The third point I'd make here is Australia has a huge stake in promoting institutions that foster stability, security and prosperity in the Indo-Pacific region. So already 70% of our trade is in that region. Many commentators would point to the fact that underpinning the economic boom in Asia has been stability in the region for many decades. So regional architecture that bolsters that stability is very much in our interests. Meanwhile, as Tammy has pointed out, it's my fourth point here, other countries are not sitting still while the TPP is being negotiated. I've already pointed to Australia's concluded agreements with others, but there are many others negotiations going on in the region. That's important to bear in mind in terms of the strategic importance of the TPP. Clearly, fifth point here, we've got a real chance to shape the trade rules of the region through the TPP. This will be the most significant restatement and enhancement of trade policy rules since the mid-1990s. It will embed open and competitive markets. It will embed transparency and rules-based economic practices. Moreover, it'll drive further economic integration in the region, so new trade and investment opportunities. Particularly for Australia, to be frank with you, that will come through access to regional supply chains, particularly for small and medium-sized enterprises. Sixth point, already the TPP is an attractive proposition just by the sheer weight of who's involved in it, particularly with Japan's entry last year, I think it was. So 40% of the world's GDP, you've heard that statistic many times. Already that's attractive to many other members, and it would be absolutely in our interest to look at the TPP as not an exclusive club, but one that expands over time. So that again is very much in our strategic interest to have a platform that expands over time in the region. The last point I'd make here is we would look at the TPP and frankly, any trade agreement not as an end goal. It's not like we put our feet up on the desk after we've concluded one of these, bilateral agreements or the TPP and say, we're done here. It's part of a never-ending process of striving for better trade rules, greater trade liberalisation. So the TPP is a really important step forward, but you take it then to other fora, whether it be TPP rules that might feed into an APEC-wide free trade agreement, or TPP rules that might in fact lead to discussions in Geneva on new areas of trade liberalisation. I was asked to cover potential pitfalls, so I'll mention a few, happy to take questions on them. First one is the deal fails. Absolutely not what I expect to happen, and absolutely not in our interests, but that would be the most obvious potential pitfall. There's a lot riding on this. Second point here, that we settle for a low ambition deal. That would be an absolute wasted opportunity if we settled for a low ambition deal that led to sort of low benchmarks. It would also give a free kick to future members who say to themselves, well, the price for entry into the TPP is pretty low, I can exclude my sensitivities, I'm pretty comfortable then. That's not what we're after. Third point, there must be outcomes for all participants in the TPP. This is supposed to be a plurilateral platform for the region. We need to avoid one-sided outcomes, and that in itself would be less attractive if future members were looking at this deal thinking, there's not that much in this for me because I'm not going to be able to squeeze much out of the system. Why would they want to join? Fourth point here, old-fashioned market access still counts. I'm not in any way diminishing the importance of 21st century rules. They're very important to us and other TPP members, and I'm not diminishing that this will be a key feature of the outcomes. But in our country, and I dare say in many others, old-fashioned market access through tariff reductions, through eradication of quotas, getting rid of safeguards, that still carries the day in countries like Australia. It's very important to remember that's got to be part of the outcome. Fifth, and I've sort of touched on this already, this must be an ever-expanding platform. I think NAFTA gets a lot of bad press time and again in this town and elsewhere, and I don't want to add to that. I think a lot of it is probably unfair. But one thing I have learned over time is that NAFTA was always billed as a platform for the region, that it would start off with the three members and that others would be able to join in future. That hasn't been how it's happened, and that would be a real shame if the TPP ended up being a similar sort of model with the original club that is not added to over time. So economic implications, I normally lead off with those. This is my third area, but I was asked to sort of concentrate on the strategic implications. I have the advantage of that my trade minister published an article in an Australian paper recently, and he kind of laid out what he thinks the main benefits for Australia here are economically. So it's things that I've covered: architecture and common sets of trading rules in the region, the coverage of contemporary issues, so e-commerce, intellectual property, investment flows, labour and environment issues. I've mentioned small and medium-sized enterprises, which we are really keen to make sure reap the benefits from the TPP. Something he mentioned in his article, which I hadn't been totally aware of, 32% of our exports already go to TPP countries, and of course we would expect that to expand over time. That's really important. But a lot of those exports will be, or a lot of those areas that will be liberalised are things that we're competitive at, so resources and energy, goods and agribusiness, health and medical research, tourism, and then of course the services that cluster around those sorts of exports. These are hugely important to us. I just wanted to touch on the sort of perhaps a couple of specific sort of economic outcomes for us, and then I'll talk about progress. So specific economic outcomes, I guess we think about the TPP in sort of two camps. In one camp, we already have FTAs with a bunch of members of the TPP. Like I said, we always see a trade agreement as taking us forward. So of course we should be building from the existing free trade agreements we have with the US, we have with Japan and other members of the TPP. So we would certainly be looking for from the US outcomes for us on sugar and dairy, for example. We would certainly be looking from Japan to take forward our fairly recent FTA, take it forward in a number of areas. We see that very much as a floor, not a ceiling, to ambition in the TPP. And then that second category, we do not have trade agreements with Canada, with Mexico and with Peru. So we're basically getting newly minted free trade agreements with those three countries through the TPP, and it's very important that that level of ambition is maintained with all three of those countries. we're pretty pleased with how with the progress on the rules front so far in the negotiations. You know, this idea of getting common platforms of rules in the region, that's really important to Australian business. You know, they complain from time to time about the spaghetti bowl, is the phrase some folks use, and so consolidating some of these rules into a common platform is really important at home. Investor-state dispute settlement is an issue that comes up from time to time in relation to Australia. We are not big fans of those clauses. They're very difficult for us in trade agreements, but we have a government in Australia that said it's open to consideration of those clauses if the right safeguards are put on in relation to sort of what I'd call legitimate public policy areas that are exempted from that, and if the overall package is a strong one. The final thing I want to mention here is investor confidence. I think this gets lost in the conversation about trade agreements. You know, we get bogged down in services market access and goods market access, and I think if you step back a little bit and look at the studies that have sort of tracked how investor confidence and frankly investor funds tend to follow global economic architecture, I think this is a really important point. So the WTO, the OECD and others would tell you the more bilateral or the more regional architecture you have, whether it's free trade agreements or bilateral investment treaties, the better chances you have of attracting investor funds flowing between the two countries. And frankly, Australia and the US is a terrific example of this. We have a 10-year-old bilateral agreement with the US. The flow of investment between our two countries is phenomenal. You invest more in Australia, US invests more in Australia than it does in China. Considerably more, and it's growing. And that is a major outcome of having this level of confidence added to through these sorts of pieces of architecture. So to finish, the progress. Like others, there is no question, there is real momentum in these negotiations, and there's no question we can see the end. There's not that much left. Australia really wants to get this deal soon. I would say, of course, that the US-Japan conversation is central to progress here. Again, no question about that. And you know, I don't have I'm not in the room, none of us are, with the US-Japan conversations, but certainly the feedback you're hearing from some of the agricultural groups in this town would suggest those negotiations are heading in the right direction. But let me add, the deal is not just about the US and Japan. All TPP countries need to be able to point to wins in order to sell their deals at home. So to conclude, we're heavily engaged in Asia. Done right, the TPP is a natural part of both the economic and strategic goals for Australia in the region. The TPP must be a step forward on the never-ending pathway to constant upgrading of rules, and finally, we think it's close. Thank you.
As moderator, I can actually intervene, which is great. Both Takashi and Tammy referred to the Australia-Japan trade agreement, and they both mentioned the beef sector in particular, and Takashi said that the biggest competition for Australian beef growers, should TPP move forward, would be the United States and not Japan. How would you respond to that?
Well, the first thing I'd say actually is, Takashi, I might have a different set of statistics. I think our beef comes down 8% on entry into force and 2% after a couple of months. So that's 10% front-loaded is the reduction. So just to give you the perspective, that's a big reduction for Japan on anyone's measure, and it's certainly a quick reduction. Look, Australia considers itself a very competitive beef-producing nation, as is the US, no question, and others have alluded to disease-related factors in those flows. As far as who we see the competition from, of course, the US. But I've got to tell you, the Australian, Canadian, American, New Zealand, and others have a group of 5 beef kind of grouping that meets very regularly, has very close relationship, and frankly, it's in all their interests, right, to lower the sort of to lower the barriers to trade. So there's a huge amount of coordination already there, and there's frankly a common goal of lowering barriers. So to the point about the TPP lowering the barriers further and allowing equal competition with the US, absolutely. We don't hold great fears that that's going to be a problem for us.
I would actually say that it might help us sell, as we go to get TPP ratified, the fact that Australia already has an in-force FTA with Japan, and that Australian ranchers are already able to sign multi-year contracts with their Japanese partners, that will help us, as it did when we tried to sell Korea, and the EU agreement was in force 6 months before we were able to get Chorus ratified.
Just in response to this Hyman's statement on the U.S.-Japan negotiations and for other TPP member countries, I could say the America, from objective viewpoint, it's sort of the proxy negotiator against Japan on the agricultural sectors. I heard the Japan might be giving the lower tariff ratio on beef to the United States. But the Australian-Japan FTA includes sort of the clause which entitles Australia to have a renegotiation with Japan. So, which means Australia might get the similar level of the tariff ratio which was provided by Japan to the United States preferentially. I don't know about the other countries, for example, Japan-Vietnam FTAs. It seems to me that FTA doesn't include this so-called clause. But suddenly Vietnam might, ask particularly other products, for example, rice. If the U.S. were given the quota by Japan, which means the certain amount of the rice could be, as I mentioned, exported without any tariff, and Vietnam is one of the largest exporter of rice in the world, suddenly interested in the Japanese market, although the quality of the rice is very different. Japan has been producing only short range. And most of the rice is produced in the world, except for the California and some of the Australia, are long range. So but Vietnam and Thai has been, thanks to the Japanese trading companies, has been now starting the producing short-grained rice. So suddenly they are interested in exporting it. But I'm not so sure how the Vietnam-Japan's case, in terms of the American proxy negotiator function. But suddenly it's true for the case of the Australia and other trading nations which has an FTA with Japan. Thank you.
Jerry has been waiting patiently. But Simon mentioned expanding the platform for TPP, and I hope Jerry can explain a little bit about Taiwan's expectations and hopes for TPP entry.
Thank you very much to the Wilson Center and Shihoko for inviting me to join today's panel to talk about TPP in Taiwan. Let me first of all invite you to imagine a picture. It's snowing. It's cold outside. Here we have a very cozy, a beautiful room. We have Takashi, a Japanese. We have Tammy, American. We have Simon, Australian. They're sitting together, chatting, laughing, sometimes quarreling with each other. Outside, there's a poor man, Jerry Chen, from Taiwan. Try to knock on the door, nobody answered. All right? That's the first picture that I want you to imagine. Second of all, I have to admit that during the past few weeks, I've been pretty busy, and I did not finish my draft of this speech until last night at 11 o'clock in my office. So I found myself I did not have time to memorize it. If I can speak in Mandarin, I maybe can give you 3 hours. But anyway, bear with me. I think most of the time I will read my script and listen carefully what Taiwan has to say as an outsider. The negotiation on the Trans-Pacific Partnership are, of course, of great interest to Taiwan. TPP is the largest, most comprehensive. Most of the time, I will not look at you, all right? Bear with me. And most meaningful trade negotiation to take place in our region. Its promise is potentially great with its current 12 members collectively representing $27.5 trillion in economic activity, about 40% of the world GDP, and about 1/3 of world trade. So how do we in Taipei build TPP? Taiwan has engaged intensively with each of the 12 countries negotiating the TPP to express our readiness to join the agreement and to exchange views on how Taiwan's membership will benefit the other TPP members. We view the TPP as important for the trade benefit it will bring to Taiwan directly, but also because joining the TPP is consistent with Taiwan's desire to integrate more closely with the Asia-Pacific and to increase the scope of Taiwan's outreach internationally. Taiwan is a particular strong candidate for TPP membership. Let me report to you, Taiwan is the 19th largest economy in the world, the 10th largest trading partner of the United States, and already has strong links with several members of the TPP and are shaped through existing production supply chains. Actually, over the past decades, our trade with Asian countries has doubled, and Taiwan's technical know-how and investment in other countries has played a significant role in the Asia-Pacific region's development. People often ask, what is the point of the U.S. rebalancing toward Asia? I think ultimately it is to increase the well-being of U.S. family and their employers, to increase their safety, to increase their economic security. And Taiwan is an important partner in this effort. Its role in the U.S. economy may come as a surprise to you. Let me give you an example. If you have an iPhone in your pocket, an iPad at home, you probably have a piece of Taiwan. Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Corporation, TSMC, the world's largest semiconductor manufacturer and foundry, makes the chip that Apple uses in its latest production product. Taiwan's Foxconn, a company, and the other company, Pegatron, assembled the first 50 million iPhone 6 through Taiwanese company. If you have a Kindle, you can probably thank Taiwan because its display screen was designed and manufactured by the Taiwanese U.S. subsidiary that's called YFY Group. These are just two concrete examples of the role Taiwan plays in Asia-Pacific supply chains that are crucial to the U.S. economy. It is also interesting to note that the U.S. Congressional Research Service concluded that U.S. trade statistics understate the importance of Taiwan. There is a huge disparity between Taiwan's export data and U.S. import data. For example, in 2013, U.S. imports from Taiwan were $38 billion. But U.S. company actually placed order with Taiwan worth $107 billion. It's 38 official figure, 38 billion, and we have the other figure, 107 billion. 3 times as high. How could that be? So CRS say that the explanation is that products designed and sold by Taiwan are actually built elsewhere, especially in China. then they are shifted globally, including to the United States. Taiwan has become the ICT Central Command of the Asia Pacific. If we consider the primary goal of regional economic integration is to raise the efficiency and productivity of the value chain, then I will argue Taiwan, which demonstrates a high level of participation in the regional value chain as a major trading partner and provides its willingness to meet the standard of trade liberalization, should be included. The conclusion of FTAs can create trade opportunity for countries aggressively seeking bilateral or regional integration. However, for countries having no chance to participate in regional integration, their trade opportunity will disappear or be dramatically reduced. Taiwan, unfortunately, faces just such a prospect. As long as it is not part of the growing network of trade integration agreement taking shape today, like TPP. Potential trade diversion as a result of regional trade agreement is a concern for Taiwan. This trade diversion will become more serious if Taiwan remains outside the growing network of Asian FTA economic integration activities. Taiwan is a small island country with limited natural resources and relatively small domestic market, which means that the growth of our economy is highly reliant on foreign trade. If our exports suffered, then so does our economy. We have studied the potential effect of regional FTA on Taiwan's competitiveness, and it is clear that our producer will face obstacles if Taiwan is not able to join the TPP. Many of our producers will face tariffs of 6% or even more in other Asian markets, putting them at an immediate competitive disadvantage. Over the past 20 years, Taiwan's trade dependency has reached a maximum of, you can believe it, 140%. We rely on trade 140%. While for our neighbors, South Korea and Japan, the metric is only 80% or 20 to 30% respectively. However, both countries, Japan and South Korea, are successfully signing FTAs. For example, the share of their foreign trade covered by FTA for Korea is 40%, Japan 20%. Respectively, while for Taiwan, this share is only about 10%. So you can see we need to catch up with our neighbors. Joining the TPP and accept will help us do that. Taiwan has taken steps to solidify relationship with its Asian neighbors and to bring stability to its cross-strait economic relations with mainland China. Taiwan's historic economic cooperation framework agreement, so-called free trade agreement, signed in 2010 with the mainland China, shows that Taipei and Beijing can coexist amicably. So Taiwan has also concluded a bilateral investment protection agreement with Japan. In conclusion, the trade liberalization is a path that Taiwan must take. It's not a choice, but an imperative. Taiwan must actively pursue FTA with its trading partners and participate in the TPP and RCEP. However, we know this is not an easy path to take. Taiwan will face several challenges in this regard. My government must convince constituency at home that pushing for domestic reforms during the process of signing FTA is the proper way forward. We have to show that we are advocating such changes not only to satisfy the requirement and obligation of the agreements, but also to boost our own ability to compete on the international level. We must show that pursuing trade liberalization through joining bilateral and regional FTA will guarantee Taiwan's long-term growth by attracting more foreign and domestic investment, raising living standards, and creating jobs. We understand that the intention of the current TPP members is to accept acceding members by consensus. Taiwan has demonstrated its willingness to undertake high-standard trade liberalization commitment on a wide range of issues, as exemplified by our recent trade agreement with New Zealand and Singapore. Taiwan liberalized over 99% of tariff lines and adopted a negative list approach in our service sector market access commitment. Meanwhile, we have also revised our IPR related laws and regulation on copyrights, patent, trademarks, and trade secrets. These important reforms bring Taiwan into line with international practice. So we are reviewing and adjusting our domestic regimes to prepare for participation in TPP. Once the opportunity for our participation presents itself, Taiwan will be ready. We are ready to integrate further with the regional production supply chains, attract incoming investment, and enhance our competitiveness through trade liberalization, improve regulatory coherence, and achieve overall closer relations with TPP members. We look to the U.S. business community to express support for Taiwan's membership in TPP when the opportunity for the accession of new members become available. We believe that Taiwan has much to contribute to regional integration as well as to increase opportunity for economic growth and prosperity in the Asia-Pacific more broadly. We hope that the current TPP negotiation will conclude in the coming weeks, and that Taiwan will soon be able to clarify with other partners how we can become a future member. So it is snowing. It is cold outside. I am knocking the door. I want to make friends with you. I want to make money with you as well. I am also bringing with me some Taiwanese cuisine, beautiful high mountain tea, and most delicious pineapple cake. I want to share with you. Please let me in. Thank you.
We've covered a lot of ground from the prospects of new entrants to U.S. domestic issues to bilateral FTAs. Before I open up to questions from the floor, are there any comments that the panelists would like to make, supplement, ask each other? No? We're good? Okay. If there are microphones, this is being recorded. If you could wait for a microphone to be passed to you, and then if you could identify yourself and keep your questions fairly succinct, it would be great. I see a hand there. The gentleman in blue.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for terrific presentations. My name is Shin Isobe with CSIS. I'm very happy to hear everyone's positive outlook toward TPP conclusion, but recently I'm a little worried about the debate in the US Congress about concerning currency issues. So it would be appreciated if I could have your views on this issue, especially on whether this issue has a potential to disrupt whole negotiation or we can avoid and conclude soon. Thank you very much.
I'll jump in first. You raise a very important point. Currency is absolutely an important issue. However, it's the view of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce that currency does not belong in a trade agreement. Recently, Janet Yellen of the Fed, Secretary Liu, our Treasury Secretary, the White House have all said that, agreed that it is an important issue, but that a trade agreement is not the appropriate place for enforceable currency provisions. I believe Chairman Yellen said that it would disrupt her ability to have monetary flexibility. A trade agreement is a reciprocal agreement, and do members of Congress really want to offer these 11 trading partners the same scrutiny of our fiscal policy? I was delighted to see that Secretary Liu at the recent G20 meeting in Istanbul put currency on the table. So we think it does need to be dealt with, but not in a trade agreement, is my opinion. Also, at this late stage, to drop something very politically difficult on the table, I think would have disastrous consequences.
Thank you very much. Well, obviously, Abenomics certainly has contributed to Japanese yen being so much depreciated against the US dollars. Well, before they came in, the 75 yen per dollar, but currently 120 yen per dollar. So certainly, this might be probably affecting the Japanese export to the US. Of course, the difficulty of the US and the automobile export to Japan, etc. But in my view, again, I'm not expert on the American domestic politics, but it might be probably sort of the currency manipulation clause in any sort of the settings could be probably targeting against the China. And it's not necessarily, targeting the Japan. So in my view, as far as China tries to, manipulate currency quite, obviously, I think the Japanese, even the, Japanese yen being continue to be depreciated against the U.S. dollars, I don't believe this might be the major issue in terms of the TPP or even TPA conclusion. But if I believe time it's the assessment, TPA might be launched soon. And of course, my question is how the American Automobile Association or something like that would exercise the stronger influence in terms of this bringing this issue into the TPA. But as far as I heard, probably that would not be put in the TPA, and of course that would surely ease the concerns held by the Japan and other countries. So if China joined TPP, I think that issue would be much more significantly argued in this country and other countries as well. But as far as China, it's out of the TPP. I don't think this would be the quite significant issue.
If I could just, I think in TPA there actually might be a reference to TP or to currency. But we hope it won't be enforceable provisions. I think the both House members and Senate. We had, 60 senators, 230 House members send letters to Ambassador Froman saying that currency needed to be a part of this. So it is a very important issue, and I would respectfully disagree. It's not just a China issue. Our companies tell us that Japan, Korea, it is an issue for other countries as well, with respect.
Well, look, just to say, I'll probably split up my answer into two bits. Your question is about currency in the TPP, sort of linked in with US politics, and I'm not going to sort of weigh into any of that sort of conversation, but just to say, people mix all this up. They talk about currency in the TPP, they talk about currency in the TPA, and they talk about currency in a standalone bill in the US, and kind of mix it all in and throw it in there as if that's the one and the same. They're different. So just to point that out, and to say we're very across and very aware of the very sensitive debates that have been going on in this country for some time about currency and the importance of action on that front. Anyway, that's the first part. The second part is in terms of Australia's view on the TPP and currency. We simply don't think that is the forum in which you would have currency manipulation rules.
Yes.
Hi, my name is TT Lyo. I recently graduated from Syracuse University's Maxwell School with a master's in international relations, and I really enjoyed you guys' discussion today. I actually have a two-part question, and the first is, in regards with China and Russia not being a part of initial negotiations, will the region truly be integrated economically and strategically? And my second question is, what would the inclusion of Taiwan mean for U.S.-China relationships, given that China still views Taiwan as part of China? Thank you.
I'll start on China and Russia. I completely agree with my dear friend Simon, where he said the original 12 founding countries of TPP is just the beginning. TPP has always been viewed by the U.S. business community as something that we wanted to make a living agreement where other countries could dock in when they were ready to meet those standards. So initially, our Chinese friends, I think, viewed TPP a bit as America wanted to try to contain China as a containment policy, but I think that view has changed. I know from the U.S. Chamber's view, we see everything in TPP through a China lens. What will this chapter, this clause mean when China joins? Because we absolutely want China to be part of TPP. Russia, I'm not a Russia expert in that. There are a lot of other calculations that will come into that, but China, absolutely, that is the goal. Your question on Taiwan, I think that Taiwan, there will be political challenges with Taiwan joining, but as Mr. Chen said, absolutely, Taiwan is very important to the supply chain. But hopefully there will be a successful political solution, and maybe it's that China and Taiwan join at the same time. I don't know that there's an answer out there, but certainly we would like to see other countries join. And to other countries who are interested in joining, I should note that people have to volunteer. No one invites another country to. The U.S. was not invited to join TPP. It was actually P4, we raised our hand and said, hey, could we maybe come and join you? So countries have to express their interest first. It's helpful sometimes for countries to also show that they can do politically difficult things. There are certainly some trade issues on the table between the U.S. and Taiwan that perhaps on pork or something that if Taiwan really wanted to send a strong signal, that might be a way to consider.
Well, thank you. Let me also say something. I think Tammy has made a good remark. Thank you very much for that. But just one point that I want to emphasize. In my remarks, I say Taiwan and China can coexist amicably. I think we have we have chance to do that. But having said, maybe Taiwan and China join the TPP at the same time. I don't think that's a good idea. Just give you an example. We spend 10, 12 years we spent 12 years to enter into the WTO. It's from 1990 until 2002. Why we have to spend such a long time? It's because China, we have to wait for China. But China is very big. They don't even need TPP if they don't want to. But Taiwan is badly need that. We can't wait. So it's not a good idea. I hope the WTO approach, WTO model won't be the standard as we want to join the TPP. Try to delink that. We don't need that. Thank you.
Understood.
On the China's participation, possible participation in TPP, I'm predicting the day will be coming. The reason I'm thinking that China's potential participation is, particularly, Prime Minister Lee mentioned, China is studying the pros and cons. I think sometime autumn of the year 2013. But since then, the Chinese scholars with whom I have been working occasionally changed their own positions on TPPs. For example, initially the TPP is considered to be containing China through the Americans strategic purposes and etc. But now the TPP has been mentioned by some of the China's particular economists as useful for promoting the domestic economic reforms. And for example, in Shanghai, the free trade special zone, now it's expanded in other areas. If you look at the content, some of them are very similar to the TPP issues. China had signed already FTA with Switzerland, and which includes investment and intellectual property rights issues, which are, of course, pursued by TPP member countries. And of course, U.S.-China bilateral investment talk, which is based on negative risk, amazingly. So if you look at the results, the sort of arrangement which China has been promoting over the last few years, well, suddenly, the TPP may not be so much, the big hurdle for China to consider joining it. So once I wrote a paper last year, the particular Japanese government should prepare for the day when did China join the TPP, because that will also change the landscape of the regional economic order. So there must be some of the scenarios we need to consider. Of course, TPP concluded, and then the loans without China over years. But in the second round, of course, together with South Korea, because South Korea, China already signed an FTA bilaterally, that also be a good way for the China to participate in the TPP later on. So again, my prediction is China is saying yes eventually. So I think that's maybe a chance for Taiwan. My view. Actually, I visited Taipei last year and talking with the Taiwanese government officials. Again, I realized Taiwan's enthusiasm about joining TPP as well as RCEP. Yes. And but of course, as a scholar, I'm of course questioned just like you. The one-China policy. For example, TPP has a summit. If Mr. Ma is able to meet Mr. Obama or Mr. Abe, that would be, the something which China considered quite seriously. But if China joined TPP and together with Taiwan, the hurdle must be lower. It happened in the case of the APEC in 1991. China, Taiwan joined APEC together. So, there are something preceded beforehand. So I know that China is the biggest hurdle for Taiwan's participation in TPP. But if, you let China go first or just to join together, I'm sure that would be sort of a more realistic way for Taiwan's participation without considering about the nasty, the bullying approach by China.
If China decides to join tomorrow, I totally agree, so that we can join as well. But if China had to wait for 10 years, No way, please.
I'm not so worried about China having to wait so long because I think the Chinese are looking very closely at, and they've done modeling on a TPP with Japan minus China, and they're very concerned that what they're going to see is trade diversion. We believe the country, Vietnam, will probably benefit the most. Vietnam's labor costs are lower. And suddenly, I believe it was Simon who said that TPP is like these agreements are like a seal of endorsement, that these are high standards, high quality, predictable business environments. So, and suddenly Vietnam, with the least economically developed country in TPP, I think they're going to reap enormous benefits. And it's also going to provide them the added benefit of helping them reform their economy. And many of the discussions we have with the Chinese, China is already on a pathway for reform. Will this type of economic reform help them? I think that's what they're looking at. When the first tranche is done, and they have a chance to analyze all of the text, we'll have a much better clue. After every negotiating round, one of my first meetings is always with the PRC embassy, and I can't answer their questions because they are following it so closely. They want to know what our beef tariff is going to be, and I don't know yet. It hasn't been announced, so they're following it very, very closely.
Just to add, I mean, these are all excellent answers. I'm only going to touch the first. You had two questions. I'm only going to touch the first one. So, like others, we're very, we very much welcome that there's been a sort of change in public narrative from China about the prospects for TPP. That's a really encouraging sign. And naturally, of course, with this sort of panel, we're focused on China. I'd just add there are a bunch of other countries in the region that aren't part of the TPP that we would very much be looking, hoping they would express an interest. And I'm probably the first place to start would be the ASEAN countries. Some of them are already in the negotiations, but some are not. So with time, I'm not talking about in, a year or two or even maybe in the near future, but eventually, looking at a broader scope of countries joining beyond the big ones that get the headlines is very much what we're after.
I can also add on Tammy's remarks regarding Vietnam. Vietnam has become one of the hottest investment destination for investors, particularly from Taiwan. We used to be, and now still, I think the top 3 investor. Someone say we are the number 1. We don't know the official figure. At least we are the top 3 investor in China. But because the TPP factor, because it accept, and because China's labor cost is increasing domestically, investors are trying to relocate their factory to Vietnam. So that's a warning sign for Chinese. So if you want to join the TPP, please quick so we can follow.
All right, thank you. See lots of hands. If we can, in the interest of time, why don't I take 2 questions together? The gentleman here and, yes, all right, and.
So my name is David Van Every, and I work with the Japan External Trade Organization. And over the course of our business, I run into a lot of companies who really want to expand into Japan, things like that. But one of the biggest issues is not the financial situation, it's not the language barrier, it has to do with certifications. And Mr. Newnham mentioned earlier that Australia, for larger projects, will speed up certifications for highly desirable products. But I was wondering if the TPP or any of the TPA, if there was any talk of regional certifications similar to the Europe CE mark or anything of that kind.
Sorry, if you could hold that thought, and if you could pass the microphone back behind. Oh, thanks.
Thank you. Jeffrey Wessel, I'm a Southeast Asia analyst at the State Department. I was wondering, since Simon, you just mentioned ASEAN, and since 4 of the TPP countries are in ASEAN, if any of you have thoughts on regional integration economically with the ASEAN Economic Community coming on this year, how that is connected or not to this project.
Thank you.
Well, starting with the question on certification, there is a chapter, one of the 29 chapters on regional regulatory coherence. So there is an effort to try to bring those together, but what often is the case in these the trade negotiators are at the table. The regulators for different certifications are often not in the room, and there are especially I should say internally in the U.S. That presents we have defensive challenges there as well. But we certainly take the point that it would be great to have one certification that's recognized. Hopefully, we're moving towards a more harmonized system, but TPP is not going to be a panacea for everything. And on the ASEAN question. The Philippines has expressed interest. We are working with our colleagues in AmCham in the Philippines on a gap analysis that we could share with the government perhaps next year on sort of low-hanging fruit. What are regulatory issues that they could do relatively easy to move them a little bit closer to the TPP model? I actually think that if we're successful, TPP is going to become the foundation for the FTAP, the Free Trade Area of the Asia Pacific. And, from our perspective, we would love to work with other countries. My friends in Indonesia have never said that they have any interest in TPP, but I'm living for the day when they do, because I think it would make it so much easier to integrate them more into our supply chains if they did. 2015, the end of December, is supposed to be the EAS. We're going to have one economic community. I think that's an aspirational goal. We do a 10-country ASEAN outlook survey. And the American companies, in last year's survey, we had 575 American companies in the ASEAN countries participate, and their progress is being made, but we don't expect that they're going to declare victory December 31st. But it's moving in the right direction, and frankly, American business tends to look at things on trend lines. Is it headed the right way? Speed, we can always complain, we should go faster, but as long as it's going in the right direction, we're more satisfied.
Yeah, look, if I can just say, thank you, that was really good. So on the certification issue, I don't know where it's going to end up, but I can tell you that companies in Australia also are saying to themselves, we want to make sure we can get access to these supply chains that are just on our horizon, in Asia. We're not tapping those like we should, and one of the barriers here is these sorts of issues that you've raised. Now, even if it's not in the regulatory coherence part of it, there is a mindset there of tapping into the supply chains that we're pushing against, and particularly for the little guys. I mean, for the small and medium-sized enterprises who don't have big parts of their firms that can kind of rack through this sort of stuff. I said this in my presentation, this is exactly the sort of thing that we think this agreement could at least attempt to chip away at. I don't know where it's going to end up, but that's what we're trying to do. On the ASEAN economic community, I just really endorse what I said earlier about that, except to say I can't help but think that once the deal is done and once everyone can see what it looks like and compare the final product versus where they are domestically, they'll start making their own judgments about wanting to come in and what it's going to require to get them to a point where they feel they can join the TPP. Again, to my point, you set a high standard, you get really good rules in place, good incentives. It'd be amazing how that would focus the minds of other countries, we hope, after the deal's done.
The Chinese always say, we want to join TPP, but the standards are too high. My response is, but Vietnam is joining, and Vietnam is agreeing to meet those standards. Now, it is true that, a country like Vietnam will have different phase-in periods, transition periods. They're going to get capacity building assistance from the other TPP members. So, it's not one size fits all. It really does, and it has to be unanimous among the 12. But if I were a country in Asia and this goes through, 40% of global GDP is among those 12 countries. So, we appreciate our friends from Taiwan. We understand why they want in, and were it not for that big political problem, we would want them in yesterday. And we will find a way to open that door, because we're going to get them a coat. It's too cold out there, and an umbrella. But
thank you.
On the ASEAN matter, I think this is something which I think the Japan, maybe in Australia, wants the United States, to work harder in terms of the linking, particularly, the business and political issues. And one issue I have to say is, if not Indonesia joining it, I think the ASEAN would not necessarily be, following the something, for example, TPP. And as far as I know, Indonesia showed no interest in joining the TPP at the moment.
Right, none.
And also, the America's attitude to the current Thai government, that would be also another hurdle for the Americas, the links with ASEAN. And of course, CLM and these Indo-China nations are not part of APEC. So it means, I'm not sure about their qualification to join the FTAP, for example.
Yeah.
And of course, in APEC, the new membership has been frozen over nearly 20 years, and particularly after Russia joined it. And so that's another issue we have to be a bit carefully thinking about. TPP linkages with the FTAP and under the APEC umbrella. And if the RCP, TPP merging in the future, particularly in the long-term perspectives, I think the dealing with the CLM and also, some other democratic countries in ASEAN, particularly by the United States, would be quite crucial from a political viewpoint. So this is something which I would like to probably ask some American scholars or maybe American specialists, particularly in terms of the, excuse me, the political implications for the possible merge of the RCP and the TPP.
From the U.S. Chamber's view on RCEP is we support, the rising tide lifts all ship. All trade liberalization is good. And our companies who invest in those 16 countries that are part of RCEP, they will use it and get the benefit from it. But as an institution, and certainly it's the U.S. government's policy on trade agreements, we try to go as high standard as we can. There's a woman back there who just keeps waving. I think you should give her a microphone.
Why don't we allow her to have the microphone? And if I can also couple that with, I saw another hand, the gentleman with the glasses. If you could hand it to him afterwards.
Okay, I'm Rita Chen from Central News Agency, Taiwan. My first question is for Takashi-san and Simon. And since both of your countries have the bilateral free trade agreement, I was just wondering why still decide to join the TPP, especially once the TPP is done, the Australia's beef will face a lot of competition from the US beef. How and what did you do for make Australia as a more attractive trade partner? And my second question is for Tammy. And regarding the negotiations transparency, I think that you really make a good point, which I totally get it. But I just wonder what and how the chambers of commerce do to communicate with your industry council or industry leader during the negotiations, so TPP's negotiation. And then do you have more detailed information regarding the process of the TPA and TPP? I'm asking because I forgot to press the record button. So do you mind if you can say more information to us? Thank you.
Hold that, and then we'll take one more question.
Hi, my name is Seoho, and I'm from Korea Trade Investment Promotion Agency, KOTRA, and a big fan. And my question is that as someone from a country where they're sitting outside Korea, Taiwan, and the Philippines, I guess they're kind of worried about how long the procedure will take for them to join TPP. I mean, it took quite a while for TPP to be concluded, so I was wondering about how long it will take. And my another question is that if China to be joining TPP, whereas South Korea, will there be any prospects left for Korea, Japan, China free trade agreement that has been ongoing for quite a few years? Thank you.
All right. Well, look, I'll go on the first one, and I think if I'm right, please come back if this is not the right way. The question was, you've done a deal with Japan, Australia. What's the attractiveness of the TPP? Won't you be losing market share? I think that was part one, and then part two was, how do you make Australia a more attractive trading partner? So, I think the first thing to notice, just to not that this actually bears greatly on my answer, but just to notice there was a sequence for joining the TPP. Of course, Australia was in on the ground. I mean, there was the P4, but then in March 2010 was the first round in Melbourne, actually my hometown. So that was the very first round of the TPP as it stands. Japan, of course, was not a member then, but we really did expect that eventually this was going to be a prospect. So we went in eyes wide open with the current membership and the potential for expansion. But again, in terms of sequencing, we did not have our bilateral arrangements in place until it only entered into force last month. So whilst we'd been negotiating with Japan since 2007, it did not conclude until 2014. So there's a whole series of sequencing issues there. But, I just come back, I guess, to first principles, which is we really see the TPP as a serious trade agreement that's going to do serious work to improve the rules in the region. Why on earth would we not want to be part of that? And why on earth would we not want a major player like Japan to be part of that? A major bilateral partner and a major player in the region doesn't make sense. You can get down to tic-tacs of what's it going to do to our beef access or dairy, and of course we factor that in, no question. But the bigger picture is it's a no-brainer, frankly. Then on to the point about the attractiveness of Australia as a trading partner, I guess I just come back to probably what I said at the outset of my presentation, which is we think about ourselves already as an open trading partner. There's not much we have, frankly, to give away in trade negotiations anyway. We really look at this as making a reasonable situation better, but also a lot of it's a domestic conversation. Domestically, are we getting our settings right at home, whether it's through a trade agreement or through unilateral reform? So to my point, that's how we make ourselves an attractive partner, because we expose our companies to competition, and they do very well, and we try and sort of take out that government support and make it a level playing field. That's the attractiveness, and frankly, to my investment point, it's very attractive to foreign investors coming to Australia for many of those reasons.
Okay, I totally agree with Simon about why we need the TPP regardless of the bilateral FTAs. Well, let me state unofficial views on that. But Japan-Australia, in my view, Japan-Australia bilateral FTA was initiated quite strategically. In my view, it's by chance, because Australia helped Japan's the self-defense forces deployment in Iraq in 2005. And already there was, the ideas in the FTAs, but Australia couldn't be considered to be a very good FTA partner for Japan. Number one, of course, agriculture. Number two, Japan can get from Australia, because the Australian nominal tariff ratio was very low, 5% maximum on automobiles. But automobile was protected quite heavily through the subsidies, and until the present government of the Mr. Abbott. But Mr. Abbott actually decided to reduce the subsidies to automobile industries and eliminating eventually, which suddenly affect the two major automobile companies, which actually has factories in Australia, to go out, and particularly Toyota. And then, which means the Australia doesn't need to protect automobile industry anymore. That would be quite helpful for Japan. And of course, important, thanks for the question from Korean friends. Korea doesn't have an FTA with Australia until recently. And which means Australia also, Korea doesn't have the automobile factory in Australia either. So it means, while, the Japanese has been producing in Australia and selling in Australia, but Korea needs to export from Korea to Japan. But Japanese Toyota decided to get out of the Australian soil. So in this case, the Korea or Japan automobile sector will be having competition in Australian market. So in this case, we need a sort of the FTA without tariffs on automobiles. I know the Japanese automobile companies usually export their own products from Thailand using Thai-Australia FTAs. So there might be trade diversion, and which means the Japanese automobile sector, particularly Toyota, might be thinking of exporting a product from Japan to Australia directly rather than from Thailand. But anyway, so I think what I want to say is Abbott's the personal rapport was quite significant in terms of the concluding Japan-Australia FTA, because it was Abe himself who tried to push quite harder for the Australia-Japan FTA methods because Abe realized Australia's strategic significance in terms of Japanese defense and security policies, particularly, and Abe was, and I think Chief Cabinet Secretary under Koizumi, and Mr. Howard, the then Prime Minister, supported to protect the Japanese self-defense forces by increasing Australian soldiers in Iraq. That was welcome by the Japanese government at that time. But what we can pay back? Mr. Howard said FTA, as far as I heard. So, it started by significantly. So in this case, Japan-Australia FTA should be considered in a more, the strategically and broader context. So now Japan-Australia Defense Cooperation has been also promoted quite rapidly. So even we are expecting the Australia purchasing Japanese submarines. I know this is quite controversial matter in Australian politics at the moment, but it's also important for the US, Japan, Australia Triangle Defense Cooperation. So I know Australia and Japan bilateral FTA, TPP, all significant economically, but as I mentioned, I tried to insinuate in my presentation, all trade agreements like that, particularly among the allied nations, are also significant for improving or advancing the such political and strategic relationships. Let me say only just 1 minute for the Korea, Japan, China FTAs. I don't expect the CJK FTA would be coming soon. And of course, it's mainly because of political relationship between Japan, Korea, and Japan and China. And recently, you signed with the FTA with China. And but interestingly, I think Korea-China FTA covering more than 90% of the merchandise product. That is quite good. It's quite consistent with the WTO rules. But when it comes to CJKs, China, Korea offered only 60%, 50% coverage of the market access. It is much lower than the bilateral FTA signed by China, Korea. Why? Why China, Korea suddenly changed their own positions on market access when it comes to deal with the trilateral FTA with Japan? So only answer I can imagine is it's purely related to the politics. Of course, that politics, particularly in terms of Japan-Korea relationship, was aggravated by recent, the expiry of the bilateral SOP agreement. And I know the, SOP financial cooperation is quite touchy because of the Korea's bad experiences in 1997, 1998, financial crisis, won't tend to be quite easily, depreciated. So in this case, the SOP agreement was very significant, but Japan was strongly aware of it, this weakness of Korea. So again, I'm quite sympathetic with Korea in this case, and I'm strongly against the Japanese government decision to eliminate the SOP agreement at all with Korea. But again, that's surely related to the history issues, the territorial issues. Well, so that's also overall affecting the bilateral relationship, which includes the trade issues. So without improving the bilateral relationship with Korea, and also to a lesser extent with China, I don't expect any CJK FTA would be coming soon. So in this case, Japan, put more energy and time on the TPP conclusion.
Okay, I'll answer the question on transparency. One of the things that this administration has done on transparency is they initiated a stakeholder engagement process. I think that they are officially saying there have been 19 official rounds, and at the early rounds, at each of those rounds, they would have a stakeholder day. And what that involved, and again, my frustration with some of the critics of TPP is that we would all go to wherever the round was, and we would be signing up and getting our credentials together. The stakeholder day, what that meant would each of the chief negotiators from the 12 countries, we had opportunities to brief them. So we would give presentations, and they've done it in a lot of different ways to try to make it a little more interesting. The last few rounds have not included stakeholder engagement, frankly, because the the 12 negotiators know all of the stakeholder positions very well. We've had so many opportunities to meet with them that there's really nothing new we can say. But I get frustrated when I see the critics of TPP saying that this is all done in secret, and yet they have the same credentials at these events that the business community has. We are an official stakeholder, as are all the NGOs and the critics. So it is a bit frustrating. The U.S. business community, one of the reasons that the U.S. Chamber has gone to every round is because not only we don't usually focus on the U.S. negotiators at those rounds. We can meet USTR here in Washington. We focus on the other negotiators. So we have terrific relationships with Soroka-san, with Elizabeth Ward, with the other chief negotiators, B. Kim of Singapore. So we use those opportunities to brief them. And what we are doing in those meetings is explaining why we believe it's in the interest of the 12 countries to have high standards, or why we believe that reasonable security or privacy rules for cross-border data flow and storage are important. The question from my friend from COTRA, new entrants, the rules are not clear to me yet on how it's going to, I believe it will be unanimous. Wendy Cutler says the last time I asked her that question, she said it would likely be look at the way Canada, Mexico, and Japan joined. And in Japan's case, where the U.S. actually had a pre-negotiation and we're having a parallel negotiation. I believe when China joins, many countries will do pre-negotiations and parallel negotiations with them. South Korea, as you may know, the U.S. government really tried to get Korea to join right after Park Geun-hye was elected. But the response was that the Koreans had FTA fatigue. They were digesting the EU FTA and the Chorus FTA. President Park had just been elected, so they wanted to wait and see. And I think many of my Korean friends were quite surprised at what Japan, how serious Japan has been in this negotiation, what leadership they have shown. One of the reasons the U.S. business community was such a strong supporter of Japan joining TPP is that before they came to the table on many of the hard things, the high standards in IP protection or cross-border data flow, the U.S. was the sole demandeur. We were the only ones saying, we need this. Suddenly, the third largest economy in the world, and one, frankly, that the other partners around the table they want something from Japan. We all want the same thing. We want market access. And Japan is in a position now willing and able to do that through this negotiation. So we are very delighted and give huge thanks to our Japanese friends, because on the rules side, they have been a very helpful partner in raising the standards to help make this as big, as good, and as strong as it can be. Australia has been another terrific partner. The difference is Japan has a lot more to offer, whereas the Australian market's already pretty open. Japan, this is going to be fundamentally a very different market. The Japanese are using TPP to reform their economy, to liberalize their economic system for future competitiveness. So we're delighted with it. Thank you.
Any other questions? No. Well, with that very upbeat note and high hopes that TPP and TPA will actually conclude in a timely manner, I hope you will join me in thanking our participants. And also, I want to repeat once again that thank you for USJI, and especially Kohesion, if he's here, for his personal support in this as well. So thank you very much, and we hope to see you again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
It was really very good. I hope you were happy.
No problem. Thank you.
That's
I'll
very
put it in
good.
the back.